Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction. Let's check if it works. State architect. So I think to me the main question was being asked to fulfill this role a couple of years ago, whether or not I would still be acting as an architect in this role. And maybe after this lecture you can give me the answer. Yeah, so the subtitle here is about being courageous, and that is what I will ask from you people, what I also ask from my team, what I ask from the entire discipline of architects, urban planners, landscape architects. And for this reason, we are in a permanent state of transition. So what does it really mean? What it means is that we are dealing with a different way of how society will be functioning now, but also in the future. And because of all different sorts of activities that will take place, which has a very strong economic component, but also a very strong sociologic component. We have to deal with, which was already mentioned in the introduction by Juliette, with all aspects about a more healthy environment, reducing the numbers of emissions that we produce as humans. But also sustainability as an act. Are we living sort of in a fair country where for everyone there is the possibility of having sort of a sustainable living environment, or are there still people who do not benefit from any action there? And the number of households in the Netherlands which suffer from poorness in energy currently exceeds over 1 million. But also the change of public space. What we see happening is that the public space starts to become privatized more and more. Companies that use these streets use the public environment as part of their business case and not providing any proper contribution to society. But also the disbalance between how the government functions against its citizens. And this is a picture of one of the houses in the north of the Netherlands, Groningen. It's an area where in the past 60 years we used this area as a source of energy, taking the gas about 3,000 meters below the surface, and where huge damages to real estate has happened over the last 20, 30 years, and where the government is not in a position to properly to find proper solutions for people to help them and to create, again, safety in their environment. Also, the change of energy sources requires a different approach to how our energy systems work. And what we currently see is that there is a huge undercapacity in our system. So years ago we decided to make a switch to green energy, but we did not decide to properly develop the energy systems which are necessary to support it. Also demographics. What we have seen a couple of weeks ago is that the State Committee about demographic development in the Netherlands came up with a report which shows that, or actually which advises a modest growth in the Netherlands. So not like a growth with about 4 to 5 million people. I think there is enough space to house that many people in the Netherlands, but a modest growth which can work alongside the sort of the reasonable growth of our built environment. But the demographics is one of the, although immigration is a difficult one to prospect, but demographics is one of the should be one of the leading elements in space planning. We know which people are living in the Netherlands. We know what is the demographic build-up, so the middle image here on the screen. And we also can predict already what are the potential housing needs, for instance, for people at a certain age. But what we do see, because of all kind of economic reasons, also because of sort of a very strong market approach in our housing, how would you say it, from the state government, the approach to housing development is that there is a huge shortage at the moment, and the shortage is growing. Juliette was talking about 1 million homes in, let's say, the next decade. I am talking about maybe 2 million homes up until 2050. If we would not take into account the longer future, it will be more and more difficult in the near future to find enough space to develop these kind of homes. And what we also see, and something which is not stated enough in the last, let's say, 2 decades, is this principle. We get more people in, but we get even many more households in. And that is the result of the enormous reduction of the amount of people who live in a single household. Looking back to the 1950s, there were more than 4 people living in a single home. Currently it's about 2, which means that we need double the amount of homes to house the same amount of people, what you can see here. And so we should focus better on target groups. We should focus also better on the existing housing stock than what we currently do. And to underline also the principles of densification, something I will explain further on, I use 2 different kind of charts. So this is the development of the growth actually of the population of the city of The Hague. And the timeline is from 2000 up until now. So it focuses on a period of 20 years, and there's a prediction for another 20 years. But if you start to look back further in time, this is basically what you see. So this time, I don't know if you see the red dot, starting at the year 2000, is actually the same point in time as what you can see here. So the city of The Hague in the 1960s had the equal amount of citizens as in the year 2020. So in 60 years' time, we saw a huge decrease of the number of citizens, but we saw a huge growth of the number of houses, but also the space occupation of the city. So I would say that densification should not only be about the number of houses that we have to produce, but also how are we going to use these houses in a more effective and efficient way. What you will see is that some of the slides will be in English, some will be in Dutch, but I will try to explain in English. This is one of the advices that we provided recently about growing cities and choices we can make whether or not to increase in the city environment or that we actually take space from our, how's it called, the countryside. And interestingly enough, because there is a huge opposition from the market about densification of our cities, is that if you look at all kind of surveys that have been done about the living environment and basically the quality, especially of densified areas, is what you will see is that the development of quality of these densified areas are increasing. So by increasing the city, we have the ability to improve all the facilities that are necessary for people to properly live. And as a result of that, people basically live more happily in their living environment. And that is also something we are doing research on, in collaboration with other kind of research institutes, with students, also with different kind of practices to better understand how these neighborhoods can further develop by densifying, but also especially by densifying the number of people in these kind of neighborhoods. So the approach we take on this and how we do this form of research, I will explain. But it has a base in what we call the agenda of het College van Rijksadviseurs. So we called our agenda de 22e eeuw begint nu. So the 22nd century actually starts off today, which means that if we take action today, it will resonate in the far future. So you better look at the far future already now in order to better understand what you need to do today. And again, to take these courageous decisions. It was already introduced by Juliette, so my background is in architecture, Academie van Bouwkunst Rotterdam. I also have a technical background, so combining the technical knowledge together with the design knowledge, well, gave me the opportunity to work in the office of Meccano already in the 1990s. Actually, the period where the so-called Super Dutch was developed, different kind of companies that got the opportunity as young architects to build on quite substantial projects, something completely different than what we currently see in the Netherlands. This is the first project I worked on. It's a theater complex in a former bank, and actually before that in a former church. And I think this is one of the, I took a few projects from my portfolio, and this is one of the key projects that sort of made the start of my career, so to say. Interesting about this project, it's a heritage environment, so a heritage building, and understanding how to deal with an existing building was extremely important to me. Maybe not at that time, but especially looking back at all the work I've been doing so far, dealing with something you can build further on, to me was extremely important. Another project, a very small museum. What I experience is that many architects would like to work on museums, and probably Michiel will show some of the museums you have been working on also recently. But this project to me was not about a museum, but was about integration of a new, basically a modern building in a small village on one of the islands of the Netherlands. And it was about the collaboration with the people in the neighborhood, far more than designing sort of a masterpiece in architecture. Or library in Birmingham. It's a project which was based on a selection process with all sort of Pritzker Prize architects, Norman Foster, Zaha Hadid, OMA. And we were competing against these sort of big names. And what we experienced was that the client was not looking actually for a big name. The client was looking for a collaboration to create sort of a lifelong learning environment for the city of Birmingham. So the last 10 years at Meccano I worked in the UK, and the UK is a complete different environment to what I experience here in the Netherlands. So an environment where everything is about making money, everything is really about using most out of the space which is available, and it's something you can also see in this project. If you're there, you really feel the density. But also because it's very much driven by turnover, you also see a very active public space. And the active public space is basically what sort of enlightens the city center of Manchester. So this is the city of the other technical university in the Netherlands, as you know. And yeah, the reason why I put this one in is the lifespan of the project. This is a project which started with a competition in 2005. Actually, during the competition process, our office got on fire, the office of Meccano, actually exactly in the spot where my desk was located, and where all the material of the competition was put on the tables, like big models, drawings, hand sketches. Everything was lost, basically. And exactly because of that reason, we managed to sort of bring all the energy of the office together to make an effort and to actually win this competition, which we succeeded. But what you see here is that from 2005 until 2017, we all worked in the office on this project, and it shows that as an architect you need to have a lot of endurance to make a project finally completed. Smaller projects. This is one of the Small projects we have recently done in the Netherlands at Vakwerkarchitecten. It's a collaboration with a landscape architect called Inside Outside. And it's a holiday park, so it's completely different to the work I was working on at Meccano, but more closely connected to actually the entrepreneur and the owner of this village in close collaboration with other consultants. But also bigger project. This is a project ongoing, started in 2022. Also again a collaboration with ZUS from Rotterdam, and where we sort of mutually work on architecture, urban design, landscape architecture, but also all the sustainability aspects that are required in the city of the future. So from 2017 we sort of assembled this team, and the team has changed again. We are with a total of 30 people working from our office in Delft, which also is a Rijksmonument, so like a national heritage building, which we bought and which we developed, translated into like a co-working environment. So besides being an architect, we are real estate developers, but we also host a total of 200 people, divided over 80 different companies working in this building, also including our own cafe. So yeah, I'm apparently the first bar owner, Rijksbouwmeester in the Netherlands. So as Rijksbouwmeester, I'm number 39. And I think what is interesting about this picture is that Rijksbouwmeesterschap actually started in the time when Napoleon was still the conqueror here in the Netherlands, and decided to have a state architect or a royal architect working on behalf of the king, working on palaces and later on palaces of justice, also prisons, etc., etc. And what we have, what you see if you review all the work from the past 200 years is that, especially around, let's say, late 90s, early 2000, the role of the state architect changed. From being an architect and being active as a designer for the central state to a position where Rijksbouwmeester actually became the lead advisor to the minister. And in that role, so the bottom group of Rijksbouwmeesters actually developed this role to a position where I'm currently at, together with my two, I would say, other Rijksbouwmeesters. They're called slightly different. Jan-Marie de Jonge and Wouter Veldhuis. Jan-Marie as landscape architect, Wouter Veldhuis as urban designer, as you can see here. And yeah, the work we do basically is spread out over the entire country. And this shows only a few of the projects we work on. Yeah, for a reason, of course, I use this map, because the map shows that although it's a very small country, the soil condition in every part of the country is extremely different from one another. And especially the soil condition defines, I would say, not only the past but also the future of the Netherlands. Some of the projects I'm working on, actually I had a meeting about this project today, is for instance Marineterrein in Amsterdam. It's close to Central Station, and it's already for over 400 years a property of the central state. And we are in a current state of transformation where this, as a military facility, already slowly combined with public facilities, is in a stage of being transformed into housing, into a working, and into a learning environment. And you could question whether or not this is a good development. Do you really want to use such a historic space in the city center of our capital as a development area for only maybe 1% of the amount of houses we are going to build in our capital over the next 10 years? Or should this be a space that should be kept free for any kind of other activities in the future. And this is a project that sort of underlines it. It's the central government parliament within the epicenter of this complex, what we call grafelijke zalen, the Ridderzaal. It's a complex which already exists for over 800 years. And what I find really interesting here in this project is because it's currently under a huge renovation process, which will take up until 2028, is that until late 19th century, there was this tendency to slowly do all kind of changes to this building in order to accommodate for future need. And that from like late 19th, early 20th century, we decided to consolidate the situation and to conserve it and try not to do any kind of active interventions anymore. And I think that's something we need to rethink, because especially nowadays, we are in a situation where demolishing buildings are starting to become not done for very good reasons. So how we relate to the existing environment, to the current stock, becomes more and more important, and especially for your generation. So designing like on a brown field or on a green field and a new building is something which still will happen in the future, but I would expect that to become more and more rare. It's not only about buildings, it's also about art. And this is actually quite a nice piece of art on our Central Intelligence building of the AIVD in Zoetermeer. I don't know if you know Zoetermeer, but this is actually quite an improvement to the city, which was founded, I think, somewhere in the 60s and the 70s. And I think what is interesting about the role as Rijksbouwmeester is that I'm also sort of the responsible in place to deal with the so-called percentage kunstregeling, which means that if there is a state project, there is always a certain amount of money between 0.5% and 2% of the overall construction budget to be spent on art. And that has all different kind of forms, as you can see here. And the fact that art has become part of the building process made it really interesting, especially in collaboration with the users. So suddenly the users do not only have to think about the programma van eisen, the requirements, but also need to reflect on their own position in relation to the building. And that is actually what happens here, and also always creates very strange discussions with these kind of clients, but also steering the change in the culture of construction, or as we call it, the nieuwe bouwcultuur, Neues Bauhaus, as it is called in the European Union. And so what we see is that there is a big transformation from concrete, steel, brick, as well to a bio-based type of materials. And how to encourage that and how to give that sort of a platform is where we use our design competitions for. So this is a picture of a competition we did in Zwolle. Currently there is a competition going on in Leeuwarden, which we will pick the winner on Thursday. And what we try to achieve there is that the entire market, so both designers but also contractors, get in sort of the mode of transformation. So from concrete, from steel towards wood. And what we also see is that once we organize such a competition, there is a bigger chance actually to get it built as well. So we have an important role there to drive change. Another thing we do is encouraging proper opdrachtgeverschap. Commissioning, yeah. That's always the, we discussed it during dinner. The translation is always difficult, but so this is so it's not an architectural prize. It's a prize for clients who show the excellence in how they perform and giving a proper platform to architects, to designers, but also to the surrounding area. And every 2 years there is a jury that will pick a final winner. So last year it was the Namen Monument in Amsterdam with this as a client. And this man, Jacques Gishaven, worked on the project also for over 20 years. So to get a monument for a total of 102,000 Jewish people murdered in Germany took 20 years, more than 20 years, because of all the opposition from the neighborhood. So it's really interesting that even in such a delicate question, we have to deal with a form of dialogue which still provides people the opportunity to oppose. Another thing we try to encourage is involvement of young designers, young architects, young landscape architects in our so-called Young Innovators program. So every half year we select 6 teams, connecting them to clients, mostly state clients, and trying to put them in a position to actually also get a commission out of this sort of design by research process. I will skip this one. Well, yeah. And this is the exposition which currently is, which you can currently visit in the Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam. It's a collaboration between the College van Rijksadviseurs and het Nieuwe Instituut, where we try to combine the past with the future. So there's a huge archive available in the Nieuwe Instituut, and we asked them to look back 100 years and whether or not they could find any kind of examples of future thinking in the archives, and we combined that with looking ahead another 200 years, which basically gives us a 200-year time span of future thinking, of new typologies being developed in certain eras of time, and how that sort of could improve and has improved society. Okay, back to the agenda. The agenda is about focus. Are we going to focus on developing a plan? People are asking for a plan in the Netherlands. People want to know what they need to do, where to build houses, where to improve or increase industry, where to develop nature, etc. And instead of coming up with a plan, we decided to come up with a project approach, with a process which is very much based on design thinking. And the design thinking is necessary to deal with all the big changes we are facing, actually where we are currently at, as you can see here in this map. And if you start to implement all the different claims on space in the Netherlands, the answer is very simple. We don't have enough space to deal with all the needs, all the potential needs, all the market needs in the Netherlands if we want to also combine it with changing the world to a better place. So we have to make decisions. And in order to make decisions, as I mentioned about this exhibition, we need to look back, but also we need to look forward. And by looking forward, I think the question is, does it need to be more or bigger, or does it need to be different and better? And that's quite a simple quote with a lot of meaning, and we are still searching for the answer to this question. But what is interesting, and sorry for not having translated this, but what is interesting is if you look at the laws which basically form the fundamental basis of urban planning and of our built environment, it's already there. So the Omgevingswet, the rules on the basis of which you can put in a planning application, is already talking about proper or high quality environmental conditions. Or on a higher scale, if you look at the so-called Novi principles, they also talk about the beneficial aspects of, for instance, combining instead of single use, or trying to avoid any kind of damage to future generations. That should be the starting point. Or if you go to sort of the highest level, which is our constitutional law, it talks about the living environment and the necessity to make every part of the Netherlands like a proper living environment for everyone, every citizen in the country. So if you would take our fundamental laws serious, you could question why we are in a situation where we currently are. And in order to find answers, and also in order to educate the people in The Hague, both ministers or the civil servants working with, I think, over 150,000 in the Netherlands, and we came up with the concept of a future studio. It's very much similar to like an atelier environment where design is the fundamental basis of, as an ingredient of that process. These future studios are very much about bringing people together and bringing sort of the right competences of architects, but also clients, people from the state, civilians, the industry together, and talking about the complexity of the issues, and not to downscale the level of complexity, but actually to increase it, and actually to embrace complexity as sort of a general approach. And we have done quite a few of these, what we call future studios, toekomstateliers. And in these toekomstateliers, we always properly prepare with experts, knowing what we are talking about, trying to understand what we are lacking in terms of information. Do we have enough people around the table to help us solving, maybe not a problem, but solving the definition of a question maybe. Bringing all these people together like for a longer period of time, not like a single day or half a day. What I experience in The Hague talking to, for instance, a minister, is that there is always a lack of time. It's difficult to get like half an hour in the agenda. What we are talking about here is that there should be a minimum of 3 days to be together, because the dialogue at night with a beer is definitely different than in the morning with a cup of coffee, which always results in outcome. Outcome that is a result of the process, but always guided by a design team which we assemble suited for the job in this case. And it generates all kind of interesting answers and findings. And almost all these findings are too simple to find out. For instance, this one. We need to be mindful of global impact. It's a no-brainer. And interestingly enough, when we started the process, this was not the first thing people came up with. But the fact that we are always focusing on like a single piece of the puzzle and not sort of widening our perspective means that we also don't see what is happening on the other side of the border, for instance. And this was also a very important finding, we lack margin. In the Netherlands, we are maybe worldwide the sort of best in optimizing our structures. When we had dinner earlier this evening, we had a discussion about like a structural principle for office floors and also parking garages, the so-called bubble deck floors. And I think that is sort of almost like the representation of how we are able to maximize efficiency or to optimize money and resources. And by doing that, we push out all the margin, which is also necessary maybe for future use of our buildings. That's in architecture, that's also in space planning. And for that reason, we say we need to create time, we need to create space, we need to bring people together in certain points of time to rethink and to also ask the question, so what we are doing at the moment, is it really the right thing that we need to do, or do we need to divert into a different direction? Is the track we are on basically the right track? So the last part of the presentation is actually a few slides of a lecture I gave during the Delta Congress late last year. I was asked to reflect on the aspect of water, and well, to be honest, I'm not a real water specialist, but it's impossible to avoid any water in the Netherlands because it's always there in all different kind of ways. And as a College van Rijksadviseurs, we once came up with the quote that water is coming from 4 different directions. So it's coming from the rivers, it's coming from the side of the sea, it's coming from the air, but it's also coming from the underground. And the fact that we have to deal with this 4-dimensional or maybe 3-dimensional risk is something we don't overthink too many times. This is a picture of a piece of art. It's in the north of Friesland, actually built as an artwork in collaboration with people from the neighboring village in a so-called Natura 2000 gebied area. So it's a protected area which almost gives no possibility to create something there, and still they have managed to do so. And it's called a terp. A terp is like a small hill in the landscape which creates sort of a safe haven once the water once the tide is coming up. And it sort of represents how people in this area already lived, worked with the water for over 10,000 years. But water is also about this aspect, or maybe not. This is about gas. So I was talking about the situation in Groningen. And this picture, to me, it sort of represents the very problematic situation we are in as a government against the citizens. Did we find sort of the right balance between taking energy from the underground from the province of Groningen? Did we properly balance that with the risks for the people who actually live there? Did they really benefit from it? The owner of this camping actually benefited from this space until this situation arrived. So apparently this owner was not insured for a situation that he didn't think it could happen, but it did happen. And this is a situation which will happen in the future more often. Not only here, this is the city of Roermond, which is 20 meters above the Dutch water level. And so people probably thought that they would be safe, and they weren't. So in Roermond, you can find this like a sad situation for the owner. But what if this project would be fully flooded? So this is in Amsterdam, and at the time that was like a week before I gave this lecture. So what you see here is that the water level went up 30 to 40 centimeters just under the line of the window frame. And the reason was that one of the huge pumps, which tries to pump away all the water from the rivers into the North Sea, was dysfunctioning. If I think there's like 20 pumps trying to get the water out. This is only one which was dysfunctioning. What if there would have been 2 pumps dysfunctioning? It would have meant that the water level would rise to this point. And what then if there would be the group of owners don't find the Dutch word, but to oppose against the state. I think then we would be in a different situation because of the situation in Amsterdam than the situation in the south of the Netherlands. And I think this picture shows that we are that we are competent dealing with sort of a proper balance between human and nature. This is the Market Wadden. It's basically the water level line, like 0.3 meters above the new Amsterdam water level. And we have the ability, because we do live in a delta and we understand how the delta behaves, to create new land, but also to make this land beneficial for the development of a healthy environment in the Netherlands. And that brings me to a question. Do we try to make everything better as we already know how we did it before? Or do we ask ourselves the question, are we doing the right thing? That it should be the fundamental question in the work we take on board as architects, landscape architects, urban designers, but also in the central government. It is impossible to not do it if we really want to make a sustainable, future-proof environment. Which then brings me to the final slide. This is a picture of a project. Again, it's an art project in the city of Leeuwarden. As almost like the result of a European capital, cultural capital of Europe in 2018. And what is interesting about this project is that the artist came up with the idea of having 1,200 trees in movable boxes. And which created the possibility of making a forest in every part of the city where people would like to have this forest. And not by using energy from natural resources such as gas or oil, but actually using the energy of people to moving the trees to a certain position and actually creating a whole different kind of landscape. So combining space, combining art or using art, combining manpower in order to create a better place for people to live. And yeah, what I really try to bring across in all the lecture, but also all the meetings I'm in on a daily basis is that eventually it's all about people and the fact that people have the ability to change the environment where they live whenever they want. Thank you very much.
I have the advantage and the disadvantage to be the second after the wonderful lecture done by Francesco. So I was wondering while listening to Francesco to change all slides. And I won't do so, but I will kind of try to get into dialogue with Francesco and of course with Juliette's brief introduction. First and foremost, I would like to discuss the possibilities and impossibilities of architecture. And as you all might know, the architecture as a profession, but also the outcome of the architectural act, the outcome of a design, is highly disputed. One of the first world exhibitions was hosted by Paris, and Gustave Eiffel, the famous engineer, had the idea to make this grandiose gesture, a kind of ridiculous tower that would scratch the Parisian sky, and everybody hated it. They were revolted. And famous Parisian authors like Émile Zola and Guy de Maupassant were fiercely opposing the idea of this ridiculous tower without any purpose, without any taste, without any expression, conceived in steel. However, now, more than a century later, more than one and a half century later, everybody considers the Eiffel Tower as the embodiment of what Paris is all about, the city of light, the city of progress, the city of love, and eventually, of course, the Eiffel Tower is a pivotal element in that. The reason why I would like to start with this is that you have to conceive architecture knowing that the appreciation of your designerly act, but also knowing that the reception of your designerly act will be appreciated maybe after 10, 20 or 100 years after the building came into being. So architecture, and in particular public buildings, define what local identity and local culture is all about. Next to that, and it's more or less a similar argument, the expression of architecture is also related to a notion of taste, relation to a notion of what is correct and not correct. Whereas the famous architect from Vienna, Adolf Loos, claimed that architecture has to be restrained, had to be modest in its exterior expression, had to be in a kind of dialogue with the surrounding city in such a way that it wouldn't necessarily reveal what it is all about. This question is permanently kind of meandering as a ghost through contemporary architecture, and I would like to address that as well. Furthermore, architecture should address societal issues. And of course, architecture is a means, a very powerful means, in order to address societal questions and societal needs. However, it can also address societal question on a more, I would say, almost metaphorical level. Since the famous book, Liquid Modernity, issued and published by Zygmunt Bauman, the Polish-French philosopher who passed away a few years ago. Actually, it's not correct, 2017. I think it's more recent, but that happens when you start changing your slides while you're listening to the person before you. Anyway, Zygmunt Bauman wrote a book which primarily addresses anxiety in contemporary society, whereas we fear the other, we fear the unknown, we fear the immigrants, we fear change in society, and one of the most powerful elements in the contemporary discourse, in the contemporary Western discourse that is propelled by fear. And the interesting thing is, and I definitely do not want to claim that architecture is able to transcend this fear, but the interesting thing is that architecture, according to us, provides the means and the possibility of creating this new collectivity, this temporal moment of being together, this temporal moment of being part of a collective, whether it's your basketball team, whether it's people enjoying a concert together, whether it's enjoying a lecture together. The interesting thing is that Bauman assumes that the collective moment where you kind of temporal are part of a group and you share in a way your identity, and your identity is liquid and transform and relates to the moment you're in, that these moments are in particular catered and endorsed by architecture. And I do think that there's a task for us, besides the tasks and means we will get to in, let's say, catering all the contemporary demands and needs. There's also a task in relation to society that we should establish spaces where everybody is welcomed and everybody is part of this temporal collective. Before getting to the three projects I will briefly discuss with you. I would like to mention that for my generation, the pandemic moment, let's say the watershed, the cultural watershed, were the so-called carless Sundays. Okay. And the carless Sundays were offering a complete reframing of public space, where, as you all know, all public space is permanently dominated and conquered and occupied by the car. Due to a war in the Middle East, there was a shortage of fuel, of fossil fuels, and in this part of Europe, you were not allowed to use your car on Sundays. And for us, being young in the early 70s, it was a liberating moment. Right? So although it was a dramatic crisis in relation to this war, in relation to the shortage of fuel, it was a liberating moment because all of a sudden you understand that by reconceiving public space and reconceiving the way we use space, just by taking out one parameter out of the equation and having the cars being unused, having them disappearing from the public domain, all of a sudden you could ride with your bike the highway and you could cross the country without being hindered by any car or any truck. So we have this collective moment and the meaning of architecture and the way architecture can kind of reposition a city or a building or a neighborhood. We have the question of kind of re-engineering and re-establishing the equations we work with by taking out one of the elements of the parameter in order to reconceive what we work with. I will show you 3 different buildings, and in order to open the discussion with Juliet and Francesco, these are 3 buildings where repurposing was one of the key elements in establishing the design. Repurposing of an old building, reusing an old structure, and reconceptualizing the needs of the building or the needs the building could cater. 2 of them are already executed. One is still in the design phase, and we probably get next month the building permit for it. 2 of them are in Brussels. 1 of them is in Leiden, and the building in Leiden is the building I will start with. It is a competition we have won in 2012, I think. Yes, 2012. I'm very prudent with dates right now. I'm making the mistake with the date. Zygmunt Bauman passed away was, of course, embarrassing. Primarily, this building, this was a building that already existed. This building, which is next to it and all, is designed by us. And this small laboratory building is also part of the design we've did. And one of the key elements in winning this competition and one of the key elements in understanding this assignment is kind of completely repurposing the existing building. The existing building was a museum and a natural history museum, the natural history museum of our country, connected with a collection tower. Since the Naturalis Museum obtained all kinds of new collections, all university collections are also accommodated in the building. The collection grew up till 42 million 42 million pieces. Let's say these pieces are from skeletons of dinosaurs up till bacteria and whatever you can collect in the world of biospheres and biodiversity. So what we did, we repurposed the existing building and we changed the existing building into a very large collective or a very large depot building. So all former exhibition halls were established, were changed into depot spaces. We made a new building for the exhibitions, and we repurposed the existing library and the existing other ancillary spaces into offices. The reason why we did so was twofold. First, since they had this incredible collection, it was very expensive. It was really incredibly expensive to move the collection. So the collection had to stay in place. So the smartest things to do was to use the position of the collection, which is in this tower, and just have the new collection in the old building adjacent to it, which resulted in the fact that all other functions should be accommodated in the building next to it. Next to that, another reason why we followed this strategy is that we could liberate a part of the site, and by liberating part of the site, the idea was that Naturalis, and that will be executed coming summer, provides a very large urban park, a biodiversity park, where you can encounter literally the species, plants that were living in the age of the dinosaurs, for instance. And next to that, getting back to the notion of collectivity, the idea was that through a means of a passage, the building could be crossed by everybody. And the idea is that the building is always open for everybody. You can cross the building, and then as soon as you start on the staircase, you are ticketed. And so in order to establish this very ambitious, I would call it, agenda related to the collective moment, related to a space, providing a space for everybody, young and old, highly educated, uneducated, from all kinds of backgrounds. The idea is that Naturalis, as an institute, receives everybody and confronts everybody or immerses everybody into the beauty of the biosphere that surrounds us. So this passage is always open, and when you're in this space, you are always in direct connection with all aspects of the beauty that surrounds us. And here you see, let's say, the existing building, and higher on I will show you how we repurposed that. So basically, by having these former museum rooms opened up on a central corridor, you have very large depots all of a sudden that are also, since they have this kind of collective spine, also all of a sudden highly secured and also relating to the highest quality of air handling system and air handling demands. On the other side, we established a system of large exhibition halls with, of course, emergency staircases in between and MEP services in between, and a meandering route which goes up with staircases that allows you to enter all the different exhibition halls. And so the section is also super simple. You have these central spines with all MEP surfaces in it, and you have a wall here and a wall there, and let's say all large exhibition halls span 21 meters across, and the large walls are gigantic trusses, and that helps you to make these kind of very large halls where the dinosaurs can be on display. There it is. There the dinosaur is. What a surprise. And then in all the other spaces we have laboratories where they study all these kind of viruses and bacteria, or where they maintain all kinds of funny animals from the last ice age, or they collect all different kinds of small animals, and they compare the development in a kind of, and they look what the small differences are between the elements and between the species in order to understand what happened and why they're influenced by climate or by other things that make them change. The idea about this space is again to create this analogy with the beauty of the nature that surrounds us. You can discover leaves, you can discover a mountain, you can discover all kinds of aspects that relate to the beauty of nature, but simultaneously we hope and we assume that the kind of the architectural power, so to speak, of this space creates this moment of collectivity, creates this moment of togetherness, which is one of the key aspects of architecture, we assume, but it's also one of the key aspects of sustainability, because one of the questions we are facing in contemporary society is, besides energy transition, the lack of biodiversity, etc., climate change, is loneliness. So the question is, how are you able to establish a space which is so beautiful that you would like to engage with the other, with the unknown other that you might have feared in advance? And we hope and we think that architecture might be able to contribute to that. The art, and we also discussed the art, or we've seen the art in Francesco's explanation just half an hour before. The art by Tord Boontje, but also by Iris van Herpen, is a means for us to identify with the space, but also to establish a kind of haptic relation. You would like to touch the stone, you would like to touch the fabrics cast in concrete by Iris in order to physically, bodily relate to what the building is all about. So, for us in Naturalis, in order to summarize what the design is all about, the design is about kind of radically repurposing the building. So we have a building that was formerly used as a museum building. We change it into a depot building. The former museum halls become depot spaces, and by kind of reconceptualizing it in that way, we achieve three things. We achieve a very low carbon footprint because we completely recycle a building that was otherwise demolished. We obtain a very secured and very high-end depot space, since all the depot spaces are together. And we can establish a museum building as a third aspect, which really contributes to the beauty of the collection, because you can make a very high exhibition hall for the dinosaurs, or a lower hall for other species, and where all the halls are really catered to the needs of the exhibition. I will now tell you about Gare Maritime. Gare Maritime is the first of two designs I will show tonight, both located in Brussels. Gare Maritime is already finished. It was the completion was in the second COVID year. I think it was 2021, or no, it was 2020. And it was a repurposing of a former station. I will now do a small sidestep, because is there anybody from Belgium in the audience? Okay, so as all the others are not from Belgium, I will tell you a little bit about the history of Belgium. Belgium was the richest country in the world at the end of the 19th century, partly due to the colonial exploitation of Central Africa, Congo, and countries adjacent to Congo. And Congo was private property of the Belgian king. So it was not even a colony of Belgium, it was his personal possession. In order to accommodate all the goods that were stolen and extracted from Congo, amongst others, Brussels needed a sea harbor and needed a place where all these goods would arrive. So in the center of Brussels, there was a giant freight station built where all trains, but all ships coming from overseas would arrive in the heart of Brussels, and that they would be able to unload their goods there and keep the goods in place before entering into customs. So as long as your goods are not in the country, you do not have to pay taxes. That's still the case. And this freight station was a giant entrepot area where all these goods would arrive. And so the trains were standing in the bays here and there, and then the trains were offloaded, and then the goods were picked up by local merchant or local transport firms in order to get them into Brussels. And of course, let's say these local transportations developed over time, and these gates, who are here, is partly on this slide. These gates were literally the border between Belgium and the rest of the world. So before the gate, the goods were still outside of Belgium, and as soon as they would cross the gate, they would be inside of Belgium, and you would have to pay taxes. In 1992, this system stopped because then, due to the Treaty of Maastricht, all European inner borders disappeared, as you all might know. And due to that, this whole freight station became derelict. And before that, the trains that would come into Brussels would drive down, and they would enter into all these sheds. And of course, they would load and unload their cargo, and there was a shunting yard here for trains as well. So after 1992, the building was derelict, and what you do have to know, and here's the harbor I was talking about, where all these ships came to the sea. And you have to know that on this side, there's a neighborhood called St. Jan's Molenbeek, which is a very reputed neighborhood. On this side, there's the inner city of Brussels. So we had to kind of reconceive this building in such a way that the building would cater three needs. It would, of course, cater new functions. Next to that, it should cater the needs of the neighborhood directly adjacent to the site. And it would also cater the need of maintaining this monument. So what we did, we established a system with 10 different pavilions, as we call them, full timber pavilions. And these timber pavilions are 5 times lighter than a comparable structure in concrete. Due to that, we could build these new structures under the historic roofs of these 7 sheds, and maintaining simultaneously 3 of the central sheds open without any function, without any means, or without any means besides the green, which is now red, and catering, by doing so, a giant covered public square for St. Jan's Molenbeek, where all people are welcomed and all people can be received. So primarily you see that again. So these are the middle bays, the 3 middle bays that would remain open, and in the 2 side bays on either side we established these pavilions, and these pavilions open up to across footpath, roads, that relate to the neighborhood, and these gates open up to St. Jan's Molenbeek. In 1992, the building was completely derelict. It was abandoned. It was in a very, let's say, poor condition. And as I said, by establishing these timber pavilions, we were able to maintain the very refined cast iron structure, and simultaneously were able to repurpose the full building and to establish this kind of very generous public space, which is a kind of contribution to the living quality of both this part of Brussels and St. Jan's Molenbeek in particular. And as you can see, due to the fact that it's this lightweight timber structure, all parts as a kind of kit and parts, the buildings were trucked into the space and then hoisted on site and mounted on site. And it also, let's say, established, or we were able to establish a very high building speed, execution speed, because it was very easy to, or easy, not necessarily easy, but it was very fast, a very fast execution process. Simultaneously, of course, we renovated and restored the former splendor of the 7 halls. And next to that, there's also a few buildings that were part of the functional properties of this freight station. I won't go into that, but primarily we turned it into this large city of 300 meters by 150 meters wide, where it never rains. And of course, the small side bays open up to the neighborhood. And under the former roofs, you have this kind of beautiful timber attics where all kinds of fancy people are working right now. But what is more important, like I said, the building caters for small basketball tournaments, caters for sports events, bourses, art fairs, comic book fairs, and whatever you need in Brussels as a contemporary citizen. So the first building was about biodiversity and creating an expression which relates to biodiversity. In fact, Gare Maritime was not necessarily about creating an expression, but it was about creating space for everybody. Regardless who you are, regardless what your background is, you are always able to enter Gare Maritime, and the new blocks, 50,000 square meters of timber structure, which is the largest timber building at the moment in Europe, provides, of course, functions for leisure, for retail, and for offices. But primarily the whole, let's say, for us, the main purpose of the design was by shifting all new program to the site base, we were able to establish this large covered square which relates the neighborhood to the future park in the middle of the site. The Proximus Towers are also a very typical Brussels project. Typical because it's also part of the same kind of euphoric hybris that was part of the Belgian culture or part of the Brussels culture. And this building is in fact establishing 3 different purposes. It's an office building, it's a very large housing project, and it also offers public facilities, équipement public. So you have to take into account that in Brussels, as a mandatory given in obtaining a building permit, you have to establish équipement public. And équipement public, if you would translate it, it's something like public services, but in fact, équipement public is about offering services for the benefit of everybody. So for instance, in the Gare Maritime, the équipement public contains offices of the Brussels labor office, so where you, if you are unemployed or if you are searching for new jobs, let's say in the équipement public of the Gare Maritime, you can have courses to kind of enlarge your skills and to relaunch yourself on the labor market. In the case of Proximus, these équipements publics are also there. The Proximus towers developed from 2 existing towers that are already on site, and we will completely redo them. But first, before we get there, I have to tell you a little bit about the history of this part of Brussels. As you see here, there's the Gare Maritime, the Gare Maritime is here. But that's an anecdote, not completely irrelevant. This is Brussels, the Brussels North Station, a beautiful design established by Victor Horta. And if you closely look, they are already clearing some houses here, and they starting to demolish parts of the neighborhood. And if you look a few decades later, almost the full neighborhood is completely bulldozered. It's really an awful act and really a ridiculous act, and it was also a kind of political revenge of certain Brussels politicians who bulldozed the houses of the poor. So this was a working class environment in the Brussels North, near the factories, near the harbor, near the Gare Maritime, and this working class neighborhood was completely bulldozed. And of course, on a certain moment, new developments came into being, and these new developments were based upon this idea. In the vanity of the Brussels politicians, they reconceived in the 60s, the late 50s, early 60s, middle 60s, they reconceived Brussels as this crossing point of 2 European highways. One starting from Oslo going to Madrid, and one other one going from London to Moscow, and coincidentally, these 2 highways would cross in the heart of Brussels, coincidentally in this former working class neighborhood, which were not the voters of these Brussels politicians. And this very important European point was delineated, was articulated by 8 high-rises, and these high-rises had a very particular configuration. They were on a closed plinth, as you might see, because this plinth was intended to relate to a deck, and this deck, of course, under this deck there was this giant highway spaghetti where all these two highways would have an interchange. Luckily, but also unfortunately for the neighborhood, this never worked out. But they already had destroyed, let's say, 90% of the neighborhood. And then they started to execute part of this scheme, or they already started executing part of this scheme, and they also started to execute a kind of horrendous buildings on top of the North Station, comprising bus stations, comprising parking garages, comprising whatever you can imagine. And this became the headquarters of Belgacom, that is the Belgium telephone company, and that company turned into Proximus. However, during the COVID pandemic, they discovered that they didn't need it anymore. They discovered that they only needed 30%. So they have this building, they have this they have this building, they have this building, and it's 120,000 square meters gross. So it's a giant building. But they discovered that all these workers, they would work at home and they would never come back to the premises, their headquarters next to Brussels Central Station. So they had competition where we were asked, and we won this competition eventually, where we were asked to kind of re-establish a new vision for this area and also re-establish a kind of new urban future for this particular part of Brussels. And the urban future started with establishing full soil. So, as you might know, in terms of urban heat stress, one of the primary elements to fight urban heat stress is to have full soil, not just a little bit of ground that is, let's say, catering your plants at home, but full soil that conceptually extends until Australia. And what we did is first kind of reconceptualizing the perimeter of the site, establishing full soil, and next to that, establishing a full perimeter which is actively programmed, where you have entrances, where you have people living there, where you have eyes on the streets, where all of a sudden, instead of having a space which is very unsafe socially, all of a sudden, due to the fact there are new activities, becomes very attractive and becomes part of the urban fabric. Furthermore, we create inner gardens because these inner gardens were not there yet, and these inner gardens, of course, create quality to the offices and give quality to the offices. We created a central functional spine, and then we organized, let's say, a tripartite building where this is housing, this is offices, and this is offices for Proximus, this is offices for others, this is the équipement public, and then in between there's retail, there's restaurants, and all kinds of ancillary facilities that turn this into a living quarter of the city. What is also key there is that instead of having their own restaurant, Proximus decided that they wouldn't have a restaurant anymore, but they would allow for other restaurants to be established in the plinth. And so all the workers of Proximus in Belgium and in France, like in a lot of European countries, except the Netherlands, of course, you go out for lunch, but not eating a sandwich and having a glass of caramel, but you have a real proper lunch, and then you go to a restaurant and you eat for a let's say for a reduced price, and then you return and then you work in the afternoon after having a few wines. So instead of having their restaurant, they decided to have all the functions like restaurants and conference facilities as public amenities, so that they also activate the street life and activate the surrounding life. And in order to further then complete the explanation of the design, next to that we established all kinds of green horizons that connect to a certain height and biosphere of the elements that surround us. And the green, of course, reoccurs here. And then we developed a narrative where you have the famous design or the famous diagram by Alexander von Humboldt, that you have different species on the top of the mountain, and of course you have different species in the valley. And he made a beautiful diagram about that in the early 19th century. And of course, since there's such a lot of wind on the top of a tower like this, we developed a narrative, and we developed with our landscape architect a series of gardens and a series of green shoulders that relate to the famous diagram of Alexander von Humboldt, that you have the proper biosphere related to the climate of this tower around you. And next to that, let's say the whole building breathes and has a sustainable performance like the Gare Maritime and like Naturalis, and I did not want to touch about or talk about it, because for me, also in the debate we might have with Francesco afterwards, I think the programming of the public domain and the possibility a building offers for the urban collective, so to speak, for the benefit of the greater good or the living area, the neighborhood or the city in general, is one of the most important sustainable aspects you can work with. Because if you take into account the way these buildings were established and conceived in the 60s, with this highway crossing of the highway coming from Oslo to Madrid and from Moscow to London, if you then understand that it took more than 40 years to mitigate the influence of the scars inflicted on the city fabric in the 60s, or it took almost 50 years to overcome these scars, we should establish a programming and a city which enables us to accommodate the needs of the coming generations and of the 50 years in front of us. Briefly also the floor plans, where you see that we partly have housing, équipement public, offices, and the large white areas in between are of course double high spaces, or in this case a large inner garden. And then there's a very large new garden on the roof of the plinth, so to speak, where both the offices and the équipement public and the housing can join this kind of collective moment where they are together on this new horizon in the city and enjoy the beauty of the Brussels North cityscape, and they look at the beautiful tower done by Victor Horta in the Brussels skyline. So, before wrapping up, as this famous quote by Paul Crutzen says, we entered into a complete new era. We entered into the era of the Anthropocene, where all our acts in relation to the built environment directly influence the world that surrounds us. And I think it's key that while designing, we should develop an answer to this question posed here, and we should establish a new way to deal with this. What is our responsibility in relation to the Anthropocene, and how can we develop a new narrative which deals with the challenges that are ahead of us? I think, before opening up the discussion, that there are 3 different levels at least to be addressed. There's the cultural level, a level that addresses us as a collective and that also should establish a language and an architecture that everybody can relate to, that everybody enjoys, that everybody considers beautiful, maybe even, that we establish spaces where everybody is welcomed, and lastly, that we also use the means of our profession in order to make buildings that perform in a better way than they have performed so far. Thank you very much.